Chapter number 2, it begins. Atoms in the periodic table. All right, so this right here is a screenshot from my computer, and specifically I went to the web page, or I redirected my web browser to www.pt1.com. I think this is a fantastic resource and one that I definitely advise that you use because, well, you can click on any element and you get this huge amount of information. For instance, right now, hydrogen is selected. And so you get all this information. The state of this at 0 degrees Celsius, it's a gas. The weight of it is 1.008 units. There's one energy level, electronegativity of 2.2, melting point is negative 259, boiling point is negative 252 degrees Celsius, electron affinity, ionization, radius. Lots of this information will come in handy later on down the line, but it's a great resource because you can click on any number of, or any of the elements that are displayed and get some information, some basic information about it, which I think is really helpful whenever you're learning periodic trends. And so you can kind of click on them and say, and have, rather than just a trend like, oh, well, if they're in this row, they do this. Instead, you can look at those specific numbers and say something about those numbers. You can kind of devise your own trend. So that's a little suggestion for pt1.com. Okay, now when we look at the periodic table, we have a series of symbols. So as an example, maybe the most common, or not the most common, but some of the most common ones that you will use in this class are displayed right here. Hydrogen, carbon, fluorine, oxygen. Deuterium is not necessarily one that we will see often, but these are all elements that are represented by a single letter symbol. Now, there are other elements that are displayed by two letters. For instance, helium, calcium, francium, osmium, ytterbium. And if you notice, the first letter is a capital letter, the second letter is a lowercase letter. Okay, and quite often, but not always, the symbol is the first two letters of that name. For instance, helium, He. Helium is He. Calcium, Ca. Francium, Fr. Osmium, Os. Ytterbium, oh, not the case. Yb is the symbol for that. Now, you have other symbols that are just seemingly out of nowhere. For instance, potassium, okay? Silver, Ag, gold, Au, sodium, Na, tungsten is W? There's not even a W in there. And I mean, heck, if you look at sodium, gold, silver, potassium, none of these letters are found anywhere in these names. But in order to appreciate that, you have to think back to, well, not every compound, or not every element was discovered by people who speak the English language exclusively. And so if you look back at some of these, I believe that they're Greek or Latin. Potassium is a substance known as kalium, so the capital letter, or that is where that K is going to be deriving from. And historically, these were represented by different combinations or different symbols, but some of the symbols have a historic relevance rather than, a contemporary relevance. So that's a little bit of the history of any of your atomic symbols or your elemental symbols. Now, the rules for writing your elemental symbols. The first letter is going to be capitalized. We saw that with helium, capital H. The second letter is going to be lowercase if there is one. So helium versus hydrogen, they both start with a capital H, but only helium has that second letter. Hydrogen does not. Some symbols derive from the element name in a language other than English. We just talked about that with potassium, kalium. It's strongly recommended that you memorize the first 36 elements, names and symbols, plus gold, silver, mercury, and lead. What I would, along these same lines, to make it a little bit less daunting, keep in mind that for quite a few of the first ones, you're looking at a substance that the name gives you the symbol, helium, He. So it's kind of easy to come up with that. And so if you're thinking like, well, what am I going to see on a test or a quiz or something like that? You would see something like a question that gives you HE is equal to what? And then C, or actually, let's go ahead and scribble that out. Blank is equal to carbon. So the expectation is that you'd be able to see something like HE or carbon and say, oh, well, the symbol for carbon is C, and the name for the name that corresponds to the symbol HE is helium. So whenever it comes to memorization, that's the sort of thing that you're going to be asked. You're not necessarily going to be like presented with, here's a blank with the first 36, or here's a blank piece of paper labeled 1 through 36. Say the names and elements. No, do not expect that. You will not have that. Okay, so this question is, which of the following is an element? And this is really just kind of getting you to think back to, well, what are the rules that we followed? So let's go ahead and look at these 4 different options. D, all of the above. Well, let's see. Maybe, but we got to make sure that A, B, and C work out, obviously. Okay, so option A, N, O. Our rules are capital letter, I'm going to do it X, and then a lowercase letter. A doesn't fit that billing. B is wrong for the exact same reason, because the 2 capital letters follow by one another. Since A and B are wrong, D is wrong, and we're left with Ca, which is calcium. Okay, now which of the following is a compound? Okay, so this is pulling some of our old information with some of our new information. Our old information was, we talked about compounds being made up of multiple different elements. For instance, water is a compound, H2O. It's got hydrogen and it's got oxygen. Now, which of the following here is an example of a compound? So what we're thinking is 2 elements. So something like X, capital X, that would be a single letter symbol, and capital Y, that would also be a single letter symbol. So if we have 2 single capital letters, then that could be an indication that we are talking about a compound. Now, if we look at A, B, and C, these are effectively all the same because of the fact that, well, it's a capital letter followed by a lowercase, capital, lowercase, capital, lowercase. So A, B, and C are all wrong for the exact same reason. So we're left with answer option D. I hope this was helpful, and we will continue talking about the periodic table in the next video.